Welcome to XPlicit Materia GODMODE, the Shane and Evan Talk About Video Games show, the show where you get the best opinions from the best non-experts around. Sit back and enjoy the show.
And we are live. We are live. Live.
Oh,
Hooray.
all right. Give yourself a little round of applause.
Yes, of course. Now, this is going to be a little bit different for everybody that's watching. This is, I've decided that a lot of my podcasts are with people that don't necessarily know everything about video games. And so
Okay.
I was having podcasts with you and Levi, because originally the podcast, the XPlicit Materia podcast, was supposed to be me, Evan, and Levi talking about video games and video game related material. And then, you know, Levi moved away, you moved away, and so it kind of then became sort of like a Joe Rogan regular kind of podcast where I talk to my friends about anything. And so, but I really miss just talking about video games. So like the talks I have with you are so fun, and you're incredibly intelligent and witty, and I'm like, people deserve to see Evan in all of his glory when it comes to these subjects and just any subjects in general. So I've now dubbed this segment of the channel XPlicit Materia God Mode. Now, that is kind of lame, actually, now that I think about it. But it also could have been like the Shane and Evan show. Like, that could have worked too.
I'm pretty flattered. I'm not gonna lie. This is going straight to my head. I'm absolutely honored, Shane. Thank you so much for having me. But thank you even more for apparently redoing everything for the sake of me. So awesome.
Yeah. So so let's get started. First, let's start with what's been going on in your life. What's been going on in the world of Evan McKee?
Well, nothing huge. I started my first semester master's program at UT. One of the classes I actually wanted to tell you about is called Reinforcement Learning in Artificial Intelligence, and it's super duper interesting class. Picture like this is like a video that he showed us on the first day of class. It's just a robot with a couple of motors on it, and it just like for the first couple of iterations it just flops around like trying to figure out what's going on, and then after like 500 it can kind of shuffle along, and then after like 50,000 it's doing the wave to like move along, because they've taught it what they're wanting it to do is like move along a table. And so it's like learning on its own, and it's really, really cool because they take that same program without changing anything, and they'll put it in a different robot with different motors, and it kind of figures out how to move around in a different way, in a completely different way. Nothing super complicated about these programs either. These are you know, a couple hundred lines of code that if you set it up a certain way, you can have machine learning take place. You can have the machine be doing the kind of educating itself on the best way to do things. It's really, really cool. And there's actually like he also showed us another machine learning program that was playing the Atari game Breakout. You remember Breakout had the little paddle at the bottom, and the ball comes, and then, you know, one of the strategies in Breakout is to send it to the same place over and over, so you kind of bore a hole through the stuff at the top, and then it rattles around on top, you get a ton of points. Well, so he's asking us, he's like, what does the computer need to know, essentially? What do we need to tell this program in order for it to be able to play, to learn Breakout? And so we're like, okay, it needs to know where the ball is. We need to tell it where the paddle is, and like what the goal is. We need to tell it where all the little pieces are and how fast the ball is moving and this and that. And he was like, they told it none of those things. All they did was show them like the pixels on the screen as they're happening. Every time, you know, a frame changes, it gets to see the pixels again. So it has to figure out where the ball is, what the ball is, what its goal. Like they only give him a reward if it wins the game, and then it's trying to win the game as fast as possible. So you can watch it like not only learn these things, but eventually it figures out how to send the ball to the same spot over and over to do that little trick that bores up inside. Really, really fascinating stuff. And they also have a list of like, these are the games that the program was really good at, because artificial intelligence can learn this really quickly, and Breakout was one of them. And then these programs over here, it had a really hard time with. Like there was one Atari game, the one that it did the worst on, it actually had to go through a little maze and get a key all the way over here, and then use the key on the door all the way over here. Well, if there was a computer big enough, in a long enough time, it could have learned that. But until then, it's got a really long chain of things that it has to do before it figures out. Because again, the only time it ever gets a reward is when it beats the game. That's it. So it's awesome. It's a really, really cool class. So a lot of my interaction with video games lately has been like making a game for a computer to solve in a certain way to test and learn these different tricks.
Dude, that's really freaking cool. That's a great class.
I know, right? It really is. It's been a lot of fun.
Did you watch or listen to the podcast with Elon Musk and Joe Rogan when they diverged
when they smoked a bunch of weed? Yeah, I know about that one. I never did. I never watched that.
Well, there's a part where like Elon gets really dark about AI, and he's just kind of super pessimistic about the future of AI just taking over the world, and there's nothing we can do to stop it.
But yeah, that is pretty grim, and I can see that.
And he's already so in that space. He's already so kind of morose and just weird and awkward because he's such a genius. He's just that kind of guy.
He's not an orator. He's like too smart for his own head, and the things he say are interesting because he's like super smart. Right? But he's not like Joe Rogan is like a speaker, right? Like he knows how to but Elon, like I saw his like 40-minute TED talk that's just an interview with him, and it's super interesting because everything he says is like really engineering related. Like he's always talking about, well, it's this many percentage of the way, and this is the data that's, like sometimes you hear about him, you're like, oh, this is just a guy that comes up with ideas all day and doesn't really ground them in anything. But he's like talking in a way that's very like physical and way that's the things are connected to each other. But I'm not worried about AI because I think sometime in the future, if somebody rings your doorbell, you'll open it up and you'll say, hey, which of these are cars? How many cars are in this picture? And if it can't tell, then it's a robot and you don't need to let them in.
Thank you, Mr. CAPTCHA. All right. Well, that's cool, man. I'm really glad that you're getting into like AI and stuff. That's a really cool little class. All right. Do you want to get started? Do you want to just go straight into our topics today? Our topics today are twofold, meaning there's two. Number one is, I don't know which one to go first, so I'll leave it up to you which one you want to do first. Do you want to do the microtransactions, or do you want to do...
Let's talk about microtransactions, because I don't know how much you've seen about this Diablo. Did you Diablo Immortal, the big like BlizzCon announcement?
Oh no.
I was actually, because I thought to myself, through the week I'm thinking like, okay, me and Shane are going to talk about microtransactions. I hope we're not Johnny come latelys to this subject, because really so much has been said and we want to kind of like find our place in it or not. Mm-hmm. And then the timing was just so perfect, because they have this BlizzCon happen this past week. And they're hyping everybody up. They're like, there's a new announcement, and it's going to be about Diablo. And that was the teaser, was that it's going to be about Diablo. And Diablo is kind of like Blizzard's like redheaded stepchild. Like we do all our development on Overwatch. We do this stuff in World of Warcraft. But Diablo's kind of been set aside for like a long time. And a lot of people worried about the directions that it's gone and what it's going to turn into. So everybody's super hyped about Diablo, and they come out and they're like, say hello to Diablo Mobile. It's Diablo Mobile. And it was just a huge like balloon deflating womp womp. Everybody thinks like, oh, this is like a fake out to their real announcement. But apparently they've partnered with like this company that has already made like an RPG, an Asian RPG for the phone, and they're reskinning it with Diablo stuff.
Come on.
That's like a diluted version kind of Diablo 3, which really had a lot of problems. And I mean the backlash has been just hilariously terrible. I mean, you got like they had a little question and answer period, and somebody was like, will there be a PC release of this game? And they were like, don't you guys have phones? Like they were completely oblivious to that somebody would be mad about this, or that somebody would take something that like has such a following and is so loved. I don't know
what. Okay. That's almost worse. That might actually be worse than the Command and Conquer thing at I think it was at E3 last year when was it E3 or some other sort of convention where they announced a new Command and Conquer game, a game that hasn't come out, hasn't had a sequel in like 10 years, and also a beloved franchise.
Huge beloved franchise.
And they come out and say, we're going to create a mobile game.
I know. And it's so, you don't want to be cynical, but like, no,
it's okay to be cynical mobile, at this point.
It doesn't mean that it's going to suck, but it does mean that it's not going to be the greatest game of all time. No one has ever asked, I've never asked someone, hey, what's your favorite video game ever? And had them be like, Angry Birds. Like, the games that are on mobile are fun, but there's a limitation there, and there's a lot of limitations there. And I mean, even my own history with Diablo, like, anytime somebody asks me, they're like, well, you are always talking about like atmosphere in games. Diablo is like the best example of a really, really consistent atmosphere, because in that time before Diablo came out, every RPG, and still to this day, still some of them do it, the town is like the safe place, and it's really bright, and there's nice little pipe music playing, and you go and sell the things that you need. And in that game, in Diablo and Tristan, I remember being there, and it's like really gloomy, it's really foreboding. The whole town is cursed by the presence of this cathedral that has eventually the portal to hell inside. And I remember thinking, in my frame of mind, I was like, this is just like any other RPG. I'm going to beat this part, and then we're going to go to Act 2, and it's going to be somewhere else. Well, that's not what happens. In Diablo, you basically drill down all the way to the end of the game.
Yeah, that's
level by level, more and more intense. And the whole time, like, Tristan is never like a safe place to go back to, because, again, it's so overbearing, and the music is very unsettling. It's not, there's nothing happy about it. There's cursed, and you're getting more and more cursed by like being a part of this game. And I can remember just being so weighed down that I didn't want to keep going deeper. I would clear out the level, and I would finally, I don't want to go any lower, because I was because I was scared. And Diablo was so heavy. And now if you watch the trailer for this new Diablo Immortal, it's essentially a cartoon. Like, that art style is completely gone. There's no overbearingness. There's nothing scary about it. They've taken kind of the World of Warcraft art style and
kind of cartoony.
It is very cartoony, and it's over somewhere that it doesn't really belong. And this is the same company that would make a game 90% of the way, and then they would say, you know what, this isn't good enough for our standards, and they would throw it away. That's what Blizzard used to be.
Wow.
And now what we have now is mobile plus microtransactions on this, because they didn't have to say there are microtransactions. Automatically
we know there are
when it's on mobile. Yeah.
Because that's where they started. Microtransactions started on mobile games. And at first we were kind of like, well, it's a mobile game. And it was started by all these these indie companies that were like trying to get some money, and you're like, you play the game halfway through, and then you hit a paywall, and you're like, yeah, I'm done playing the game. And that's what it was. And then it started coming onto console games, and then PC games, and then it's come to this point right now where companies are struggling. They're trying to balance the gameplay with the microtransactions, as evidenced by the controversy of the new Assassin's Creed Odyssey game. And to be fair, that game is a whole hell of a lot of fun, extremely addicting, and I haven't had this much fun playing a game probably since The Witcher, and that's big. That's saying something big. Now, it's not as good as The Witcher, of course, but there are
But you're
elements.
having fun.
I'm having fun, and there are elements where it's obviously they took a lot of inspiration from games like The Witcher. They took the good parts of The Witcher, and in some cases, it's actually more fun than The Witcher because you get to climb and assassinate shit. That's pretty cool, and the world is humongous. The graphics are great, but then this controversy came about saying that the game is really grindy, and the game is really grindy. But the grind is super fun. We had this conversation a while back where he said, as long as the grind is fun and you're having fun doing it, and it doesn't feel like it's a chore, then you're on the right track. And Assassin's Creed achieves that to a certain extent. But the problem therein lies is, what kind of player are you? Are you the type of player that just wants to do all the missions and just speed through the game, which a lot of people do? And Assassin's Creed, let's be honest, has historically had a gameplay style that doesn't have a lot of side quests. They had like a little bit of side quests here and there, but you can mainly just because it was an adventure game first and foremost, and then they started adding more and more RPG elements to it, and now essentially it's full blown RPG. It is 100% open world role playing game, multiple dialogue choices and consequences to those choices, although they're not as expansive as the games like The Witcher or Dragon Age, but still there are consequences to your choices. And in any case, Ubisoft decided to add in a $10 XP permanent XP booster, which will boost your experience that you gain 50% forever. Until you delete the game, or I guess even if you delete the game and buy it again, you just have it forever.
Sure.
And so the controversy isn't that essentially monetizing a gameplay mode? Isn't that essentially monetizing easy mode? When you put in a game, you say, go into options and you go easy, normal, hard, and you go, I want to play easy. And but like in Assassin's Creed Odyssey, you still have that option. You can still play it on easy and normal and hard. But then you can even get it. You can get it even easier if you pay the $10 extra to cheat a little bit. So it's not a problem for me. And me, I love playing games on easy, and I like my hand being held.
Sure.
So it hasn't been a problem, and it's been super fun. But the danger of monetizing gameplay styles it's looming heavily.
Right. Because the worry is that they're going to make a game. I really liked one of the lines, and I think it might have been Kotaku or one of the articles that you sent me were sending this there. Basically, you're paying to solve a problem that the publisher has created with slow and controlled leveling. In other words, the problem was that part of the grinding wasn't fun. And they capitalized, instead of fixing that and making it more fun, they said, well, what if we made it so you could pay and skip the part that's not fun? And that's not not ever the right, I guess, question to ask, or the right decision that should be made. And it's a very, very slim difference between that, something where it looked like they made a fun game, and then they were like, some people don't want to grind, let them pay this. There's very difference between that and somebody that's like, hey, I made a crappy game, and if you want it to be fun, you're going to have to inject money into it. Yeah. That's like a backwards value system.
Yeah, absolutely. And, it's getting gamers to kind of turn on each other. I saw like a little Twitter beef between two of the people that I respect the most in the gaming world, and it's Young Ye, who's just fantastic, I guess, YouTube journalist, if you will. He's spot on every video that he makes, and he's really fair, really respectable, usually. And then Jason Schreier, who's like one of the best journalists in gaming, I think. And they got into a little bit of a beef because Young Ye said microtransactions are predatory. And he was referring to Assassin's Creed Odyssey. Jason Schreier disagreed and then said something kind of snide against, like, basically generalizing all YouTubers, saying that, they're using this. I'm paraphrasing, of course, out of respect, but something along the lines of the microtransactions in Assassin's Creed aren't the worst thing in the world. But I guess that's not that's not good for your YouTube headline or something like that, and Young Ye took a little bit of offense to that. And he was
Those
just
are YouTube fighting words, man.
He was like, hey, man, like, I have something to say and it has substance to it. And I totally agree with him. And I think, Jason Schreier has a point. I think Young Ye has a point, because the microtransactions in Assassin's Creed aren't exactly predatory, but they're getting, peeping, like the Predator, like, oh, sorry, that's a bad joke. Like, they're peeping through the window. They have the telescope through the window, and they're looking at the neighbor changing and unchanging.
It's so great. It's so great. It's so great that you thought of a visual that our viewers could understand, that they could relate to.
It's like To Catch a Predator. Okay.
They're peeping, Shane.
They are. I will say this: they are testing the waters.
They have, and that is there's this big frontier of like options, I guess, the developers have that are new options, and they're rooted in like studies that are based in psychology, and they're thinking like, what's the most possible amount of money that we can take from people, basically, is the question they're asking.
Right.
And I remember when the Battlefront 2 controversy was a major microtransaction puzzle that everybody was kind of trying to navigate. And EA's position was, you can't, if you don't want to buy Darth Vader, you can unlock Darth Vader after 40 hours of gameplay. And people made fun of that. And I remember thinking, we can all think of games that were so fun that we played way more than 40 hours of gameplay. We put way more than 40 hours into it, right? So when people got mad and they were like, at first you might look at that and think, well, who are these entitled players that they should be the ones to decide 40 hours is too long to get, what we want? Who are these entitled players? But then what they're really saying was this fear of, what if the game sucks? What if I don't want to play it for 40 hours?
Right.
And so it kind of goes back to like, if from the get-go their whole purpose was to make a fun game, none of this would matter. You would be happy. There's plenty of fun games that have microtransactions that people are happy to play. But then there's other games that they have kind of handicapped or hobbled, and then said, if you want, you can pay this money and like get extra. And there was a study done, I remember, with these monkeys, where they give these monkeys over here an apple, and they're all like, hey, cool, I have an apple. And then they give these monkeys over here 2 apples, and then they take one away. And those monkeys just flipped out. They weren't having that at all. And so they use that as the basis to say, they've even done these other studies, and they're like, gamers, what is the type of advertising that you hate the most? What do you not mind and what do you hate the most? And when they say, well, we don't mind if we're playing a game and we're swinging through in Spider-Man and we see a Texaco logo on a building, we don't mind that, right?
Yeah, don't really
care. But if we're
care.
playing a game and then the game gets chopped off, and they're like, stop, you have to pay now. Like you if you want to keep going, you have to pay now. And that's the taking the apple away that enrages people and absolutely makes them so mad. You're like psychologically designed. And the study said people hate that kind of advertising the most. And of course, it's almost like you're supposed to hate that kind of advertising the most, because that's how they're going to get you to make it go away. You're going to want to spend money, and you're going to want to escape.
Yeah. Wow, that's a great. That hits the nail right on the head, because you're absolutely right.
That they're almost, Shane, don't underestimate that this is like the video games are the money maker now. Like video games make way more money than movies do. Music. So of course there's going to be a conglomeration of all of these different fields of study. Even psychologists are going to say, hey, we've studied this and we find that if you do this in this color, you can take more money from people. People are just going to jump on that.
Right. But it's to your point that video games are the money making, the money maker now. They really are, because Red Dead Redemption 2 just came out, and it had the biggest opening weekend of anything ever in entertainment history. That's movies. That's anything. That's anything.
Yeah, that's insane. Grand Theft Auto 5 made $6 billion. Or has made $6 billion over its lifetime. That's billion with a B, which is more than like the highest grossing movie all time, highest grossing anything of all time. It's just, there's a lot of potential here. And so we're going to have a lot of, in one way it's like, ooh, a golden age. Maybe we're going to see some good games. And another way it's like, all of the evil people who have ruined all your other things that you loved are going to come to video games now, and they're going to ruin that now.
Yeah, that brings up the point. It's like, is it just sort of inevitable that, any company that is in business, whatever, it doesn't matter how, the company starts off good, it's really consumer friendly, starts doing, really good things, and, I'm going to Amazon, Apple, like they do really great consumer things. And then eventually they get so big that, they have to infinitely grow because they're a company, they have investors and stocks and all that stuff. And, they need to do better than the year before. So is it inevitable that eventually they start becoming not consumer friendly and start becoming predatory because now they've hit a goal so high that they can't possibly reach it through just regular innovation? They have to innovate ways to cheat people out of their money in order to hit that goal.
They're really the turning point, I think, for those companies is when, regardless of what, because they can put out a bad computer and whatever, they haven't really done that much damage to the world, right? Mm-hmm. But when they stifle innovation from others, in other words, when they have enough money that they can kind of like monopolize that area and make it so that anyone else that wants to do something like they're doing but better, and that's one area in which like it's people like the guy that made Minecraft can come up with like something really cool and it be their pet project and make a huge amount of money. And we're there in video games where innovation actually kind of works, but it may come a time when there's not a lot of like garage indie games being made that are worth anything, and really the only options that we have for fun games are games that have thousands and thousands of names in the credits and just these AAA, I guess, titles that really at that point we get mad because it's like we don't have any other options. We have to yell at this game and all its flaws because there's nowhere else we can go to.
Right.
So
yeah, and yeah, it and I was thinking about this, and I've kind of said this before when we talked. I can't remember what we talked about, but I feel like this is a problem because video games haven't gone up in price in like 20 years. And with inflation and all that stuff, I remember reading something like how much was Legend of Zelda when it came out in 1989, and how much would it have been if it came out today, technically, and it was something like $100. It was $100. It was a $100 game that we bought, but it was $50 in '89 because of of the price point, whatever, and economics, which I know very little of. But so what do you think that a company would benefit from just going, you know what? We've heard video gamers, we've heard your complaints about microtransactions and loot boxes and all that stuff, and we're just not going to do any sort of microtransactions whatsoever. No predatory. We might do some microtransactions that are like clothes and fun stuff like that have nothing to do with gameplay. But for the most part, no microtransactions. However, the game is going to be $75. Now, would a company benefit from that, or would no one buy the game because everyone would well, I'm not going to pay $75 for a game that I've been paying $60 for a game for the past 20 years.
I would sometimes when people talk about that price point of $60 and how like it's really throttling people that want to charge more and stuff, kind of forget that the price of a video game is also determined by the market. That really there's these two blades of a pair of scissors called supply and demand that are coming together at a price point that really one person doesn't have a lot of power over. Now, there are plenty of I can even think of games that I've spent well more on $75 because the microtransactions were things that I wanted, or I wanted to reward that game for being, if you added up all the cool cars that I bought in Rocket League, just it's well more than the price of the game because it was my way of telling them, great job. Yeah. And that is, I think, the benefit of microtransactions is that you're able to pay some and then get some value and kind of really get an idea for how you're going to like the game. I don't like the idea of, okay, I've never played a game before, but you want me to pay $75 for it, sight unseen. I don't really like that. But if you make me pay half now and then I play the game, right, And I'm not going to say, it's not going to be like that one game, Asura's Wrath, where they hide the ending of the the ending. It's a Frontier. It's just absolutely crazy out there. They hide the ending of the game behind a paywall. So you play the entire game, and then you have to pay $6.99 if you want to, I think, like, fight a boss and see a cutscene, basically. It was what that kind of boiled down to. And so people describe, I guess, a value of a video game in different ways. If it's a good video game, it's worth not only my money, but like years later, my time when I go back and I play through it again and I have a lot of fun. And it doesn't matter that there's, if there's like some DRM that's preventing me to do that, then that makes the game less valuable now. And, they would teach us when I used to sell windows and I used to sell cars, and they would tell us, you don't just start talking to the customer and say, this is how, or anything. It could be like, on the show Property Brothers. They don't go in and say, this house is $800,000. They say, look at this living room, look at this bathroom, look at this. And you get a value inside your head, and once you've built enough value, then you throw out the $800,000, and they get to decide if the value is more or less. And so that really, we don't have like demo discs anymore. I kind of wish it was a little easier. I kind of wish sometimes you could. It's kind of weird to say, okay, here Red Dead Redemption is like 100 gigs worth of game. It's a little difficult to just like send you a small piece of it and see if you want to play it.
Right.
So you kind of have to go at that point. You kind of have to go, but it's an interesting idea. And it's an interesting, I guess, market. And I don't. If all the big name players now have made so much by microtransactions, I don't see any of them saying we're going to put a hard stop to that whole us getting more money thing, because expansion packs have been around forever, right? Nobody got mad about this when it was expansion pack.
All right, well, maybe we can delineate between, what kind of microtransactions we're talking about here, because I don't think there's I think there's a difference between microtransactions. Well, maybe there's not, because I guess technically in the broader term, microtransactions, DLC is also a part of that, because it's extra, and you're paying for an extra piece of the game that didn't come with the base game. But I think there's a difference between, the regular small little loot boxes and the small little items, the clothing and all that stuff, and regular big expansion packs, like, let's say, CD Projekt Red. CD Projekt Red doesn't really have much in terms of little microtransactions here and there that I can remember. Maybe there are. Am I wrong? I might be wrong.
There's the same kind of, I guess, elements are at play, and maybe you're right that we do need to kind of delineate, okay, this is when we're talking about these microtransactions, and this is, but when I say like nobody ever got mad about expansion packs, is because that really seemed like a two-way street that was benefiting both. The developers had more ideas for the game, and even after the launch date, they were like, there's more we wanted to put in, and there's a lot of fun stuff, and this is the only time, 5 years from now, they're not allowed to use that same engine to make a game, right? So all the tools are there to make this kind of like broader world for the people that are big fans. You can spend more money, and that was seen as like a good value proposition. It was like, it wasn't as much as a game, but some people were like, hey, this expansion has way more than the original game. It's a great deal. Some people were like, hey, this one I paid a lot of money for, but it didn't extend the game that much. It was another maybe 5 to 7 hours of gameplay. And so people had in their mind like the standard of what a good kind of expansion pack was to be. And so I think that in terms of like value, I think gamers are smart enough to be like, this right here, I've heard some really good things about, and this is cool. Or you can be like me, and if you wait long enough, the games are on sale at Steam, and they give you all the DLC, and it's just all included.
Right.
And the only problem is that you have to be like, hey guys, it's 2018. Have you guys played this super cool game called Breath of the Wild that I just discovered? That's the only problem with being a patient gamer. But you get a lot of that, like, you get to see how kind of I'm thinking of Tomb Raider in particular, where you were walking and it was like a normal like kind of game, and then there was a part that you could tell was added in the DLC, and they put so much effort into it and so much like really, really cool like creative ways to solve this puzzle and stuff. And I like that. It's almost like a way of saying like, we have a release date for the game, but there's no release date on the cool things that we as developers can do with it if you give us some more money. I have no problem with that, and no one has ever had a problem with that, I guess. I think the things we have problems with when it comes to microtransactions are universal. Everybody hates the idea that you can pay more in a multiplayer game and be better at the game. Everybody hates that. Everybody's okay with any cosmetic thing that affects the game in no way. They're happy to say, you know what, that's a place for microtransactions. That doesn't change the game. It doesn't make you stronger. It makes you look cooler or whatever. And they leave it, you know?
Yeah. I think those are... Okay, so there's this interesting article that I found that came out a year ago, and it's from GameCrate.com, and it says 10 guidelines for creating ethical microtransactions. So there's,
I liked it. How long ago was that?
A year ago. It was a year ago. Okay. So it's interesting. It's interesting, and I agree with I think all of it. Honestly, if I read it over again, I'm going to read over the rules real quick for our listeners and our watchers here. Rule number 1: never lock portions of the main game behind a paywall. I think we can all agree with that. That's a good one. Because you just mentioned that ending from Asura's Wrath, which is, God, that's hilarious. Rule number 2: never let someone pay for power in a multiplayer game, which you just said, because nobody likes that. That's ridiculous. Because you're essentially cheating. You know, you're paying to cheat.
It's not fair. You can see how not fair that is to all the poor kids out there.
Could you imagine, like in like any other sporting event, you know, like a UFC, you know, it's like, you know, he's rich, so he's more rich than his opponent, so he's allowed to have steroids.
Do you know what a whale is? Have you heard the term whale in this kind of microtransaction discussion, where they say the developers have said, even if 99.9% of you don't buy any of the DLC at all, we'll still make our money back on the 1 or 2 people or 3 people that money is no object and they just pour money into. They call them whales. And so some people have said, okay, whales are the reason that this is happening. Some people have said they shouldn't cater to whales because the other 99.9% of us are here to play a fun game, right?
Yeah. Well, that's interesting. I've never heard of
that. But you know, online it would be like, okay, the whales get to win everything because they have just an unlimited amount of money, and everybody else just has to scrap and scrape.
Well, I think eventually, if they want to keep playing that game, it's like eventually they're not going to have a whole lot of people playing their game. You know, they're just eventually stop playing the game. Because
run people off,
run people off. Rule number 3: do not balance your game around DLC or microtransactions, which we talked about earlier. When, you know, they're writing that line. You know, a lot of these companies are writing that line, trying to balance the game. Is like, well, we need to make money, but we also still want this game to be fun. We want this game to not hit as many blogs in a negative sense as possible. And so, they're all writing that line. Rule number 4: make sure it's reasonable to beat and complete your game without spending money. So right now, as I've said before, I'm playing Assassin's Creed Odyssey. Right now, I'm beating the game handily because my character is badass. And, the side quests are so fun. The side quests are actually a lot of fun. They have substance to them, which is something I think they grabbed from The Witcher. The Witcher actually, the side quests felt like actual quests. And Assassin's
you
Creed
felt lucky. You were like, I know this isn't required, but I'm so glad I tripped over this.
Right.
Yeah.
And Assassin's Creed is kind of like that. I can see where they're grabbing the inspiration from. It doesn't really hit all the way because, you know, the character's responses to these side quests are, you know, like when you finish a quest and he's like, I'm always ready to do the job, or something like that. And it's like the same answer to all the, you know. Meanwhile, like Geralt will have like 10 different lines of dialogue for one character, depending on what, you know, where the side quest takes them. So that's rule number 4. Rule number 5: when at all possible, make microtransactions non-random. Yes, loot boxes are... I think that is the biggest issue when it comes to this conversation. And I don't play online, and I don't buy loot boxes. I don't pay for a whole lot of microtransactions anyway, so I'm not really familiar that much with loot boxes, except for listening to different YouTubers talk about it and reading different articles about it. But essentially, it's gambling. And I don't know if you know about this, but I forget what country it is. I think it's Finland or
Belgium.
Belgium. Yeah, Belgium just said loot boxes are gambling and completely illegal. Don't do it. And then EA had the gall to say, we're going to have loot boxes in our games anyway. You're wrong. And so now there's going to be this huge court battle between the two. And I'm sitting here thinking, I side with Belgium on it. I'm like, look, man, like the odds that kids are playing your game and buying these things, they don't have any sort of concept of I think it says in this article actually that kids don't have any concept of what money is. You know, they don't have, because they're kids. They don't care. You know,
and that's why you're buying coins, right, to trade for something else. So they kind of change the value around of what, they don't think of it as in dollars. They just bought some coins with some dollars and now they're spending coins. And it's like kind of lost in translation how much you're actually paying. I think I was watching, again, Yang Ye, and he was talking about, Yang Ye, he was talking about FIFA 19 and their loot boxes, and FIFA 19 apparently is just awful. And it's just basically the same game, but just repackaged and just with terrible microtransactions and stuff and loot boxes. And apparently the chance of you getting something of merit from a loot box that's actually worth it is like something 0.0001% chance that you're going to get something like fun and interesting to use for whatever it is that you use for FIFA 19. There was legislation proposed in, I believe it was China. It was an Asian country where gambling addiction is a huge problem. And what they proposed was, instead of getting rid of loot boxes, you have to label in the same way that like they label calorie counts on menus. You have to label how likely it is that you're going to get this item in the loot box. Right. So that way, because kind of loot boxes are taking advantages of that gambler's fallacy where really you think you're paying for this thing, like the one thing you really want in a loot box. There may be 22 items in there. The one thing you really want, you pay thinking that you're going to get that. But really, what you're paying for is the chance to get that, and it's diluted heavily by the fact that you probably won't. There's a really good chance that you won't. Right. So that's you talk about predatory. That is really that's really taking advantage of a trick in people's brain. And then FIFA was the game that kid charged up like $4,500 on his parents' credit card, and I remember them interviewing the dad, and he was like, "This isn't anyone's fault, but they really shouldn't have just made this a one button does everything situation where if you want something you just push and money comes out of daddy's credit card." And I was like, he's got a point. Yes, he's got a point.
Does. Rule number 6, manage an ethical store that guards against predatory practices. So I don't know I didn't read this one.
That's talking about stuff kind of like black market or gray market transactions where people realize like it's actually more like you could buy from the developer for $5. You could buy Darth Vader, right? Mm-hmm. Or you could go to kind of the internet and somebody's like, hey, I had a bot grind until I could get Darth Vader for free. And so it's only $4, right? Mm-hmm. So that's the kind of like, they really shot themselves in the foot because now they call it a gray market because it's like technically legal, but those have been around since like ever. Hearthstone, like any kind of like card game where there's a lot of randomness into it, people will say, I would be willing to pay to get rid of the randomness. And so there's kind of like a black market of items.
Right. Rule number 7, anything that can be purchased should be able to be earned, which I guess Battlefront tried to explain. But then people are like, no.
Right.
No, you missed the boat completely. And
that is a rock solid defense, though. If people are mad at you about transactions, and you can say, there is a way to get this.
Okay. Yeah, but it's like,
but you still have to make your game fun enough that it's worth getting.
Right, and it shouldn't be like you have to, playing for 40 hours just to get one thing. And I think it matters the content of what we're talking about here, because we're talking about Darth Vader and Luke Skywalker. Like people want to play as those characters. Okay, it's just they'll always want to play as them. They won't want to, and if you and they knew that, and so they said, we're gonna make it. You can earn your way, but it'll have to take 40 hours out of your life grinding, doing the same mission over and over and over again, and hopefully you'll get to that point. Or you can pay $10 and get Darth Vader.
I know it is, and it's really scummy. I think it's really scummy on their part. There's and we talked about this, like you said, a little bit when we talked about grinding, but I wish more developers understood that fun is king, to the point where, like, if you've made an open world game, you don't need to make the open world just the roads between fun points, right? Where you get there, and once you start the mission, then the fun starts. If you're making a video game and you want it to be a good video game, it has to be fun to walk. It has to be fun to run. It has to be fun to jump up in the air. And that's one of, I think, Assassin's Creed is one of those games, kind of like Tony Hawk games, or even Mario 64, where it was just fun to run around, just for the sake of running around.
Yeah.
And that kind of parkour element where you're going through an Assassin's Creed game and you kind of get a chain of things, and you're like, they meant for me to kind of find this, but they didn't lead me to it. You need moments like that. And if people have, I think I used to say, well, what's a game where the grind is fun? And now I say people use the word grind to describe a thing that is intrinsically not fun, where there's something that's fun that they can't get to because they have to grind to get there. And that's a mistake on the part of the game developer. They should have made it so that everything you were doing up to that point was fun, and now here's this other thing that's unlocked. Yeah,
and that's a great point, because that's what, again, you really need to play Assassin's Creed Odyssey, because it's really
sounds great.
It's so fun. It's a lot. I thought Origins was great, and Odyssey is, I think, just at least 2 times better. They just really killed it. They nailed it. Although I can understand people's concerns about, like, they just want to get through the main story, but there's just so much to do. I've put 60 hours in the game already.
That's
and
1.5 Darth Vaders.
There's 1.5 Darth Vaders. Exactly. And I'm just loving it. I'm loving the game. And if they make another game that's just like that, and just don't rely on that XP booster. If you please don't make the game any harder than it is right now. Because once you start doing that, then people are going to start to blame that XP booster, saying that, oh, now you're turning the game a little bit harder so that people will buy the $10, easy mode, if you will. Rule number 8. Don't create arbitrary roadblocks that can only be removed by microtransactions.
Like a timer on a mobile game, kind of?
Yep, okay. Exactly.
Although on a free mobile game, I feel like you don't have a lot to complain about if the game is free to begin with, right?
Yeah. Rule number 9, offer bundles and give stuff away for free. That's always good. People like free stuff, and there's nothing much to be said about that. And finally, rule number 10, make your extra content weird. I don't know anything about that. This can be okay. I'm going to go a little further into this number 10. This can be applied to just about any game model. Who wants to play as the Ninja Turtles in Injustice 2? Everybody. But they aren't who you think of when you think DC characters. They are guests, additional characters for anyone who is still playing the game almost a year after its release. And that is an article from Game Crate. I suggest everyone read that, because I think that's a pretty damn good set of guidelines for creating ethical microtransactions that aren't predatory.
Honestly, each one of those points, each one of those headings, I should say, had some little information underneath it about one of the things that we talked about. There's very little that we cover that's not like all kind of mentioned in that article. And it's really interesting that even a year ago, I guess, and now there's like, it almost seems like everywhere you turn, it's just a given that a new game is going to have microtransactions.
Yeah, which is sad, and hopefully, companies will start to listen to the complaints. I think that's it for the microtransaction topic. What do you think? I think that's pretty good.
Okay. I think we did great, yeah.
And you wanted to talk about this other topic, which is actually a topic that I've really been wanting to talk about for a while. Yeah, I mean, well, to the sense of like, you're starting to see a lot more, and this topic is we're talking about depression and how video games actually assist with alleviating symptoms of depression. And, lately there's been this kind of push against video games yet again, because we can't, if there's a societal problem anywhere, video games are usually the first ones to be targeted. And,
right.
Lately there's this new study that came out that said, violent video games actually do in fact make people gamers more aggressive or something. Did you hear about that or read about that?
I've been hearing that my entire life, right? That video games are so evil that they cause violence and everything else.
And I'm just sitting here thinking, well, what is a video game? Let's just take the violent part out of it, regardless. I'm pretty sure there are thousands of people out there that play Splatoon, and after they have a really competitive match with somebody, I'm pretty sure someone's on the video chat saying, "I'm gonna kill you," or I'm very angry.
Absolutely.
Or you look at any other sporting event. If you've ever played sports at all, football, basketball, soccer, tennis, volleyball, you're in that competitive mode, and when your adrenaline is rushing and you're just trying to win, and you're just like, yeah, we're gonna win, and then you lose. If you've ever played sports at all, or any sort of competition whatsoever, and that gets taken away from you, like, if you don't have thoughts of violence, then you're not a competitive person. You don't have, like, you just want to hit something. You don't want to not hit something. You just want to just throw your arms in the air and just be like, scream and just be so because I used to be like that when I was playing basketball. I would get so emotional and so competitive. And I've never been in a fight in my life, but when I'm playing basketball, I screamed at a ref. I screamed at a ref because, he said I fouled the kid, and I didn't.
It's a little difficult to picture, but I believe you.
Yeah. But that's what I'm saying. It's like, it's competition that makes people aggressive, not the content of what they're playing, Like, that doesn't, that completely misses the point of these games. And I would go even further and say that video games do help with people's mental health. And because if they are going through a problem, they use video games as an escape. Other people use books. They sit down and veg on a movie or whatever.
Well, I think the thing that kind of informed this topic coming to the front of my mind was that one thing I kept hearing when I would talk to people about depression. I would talk to people about their depression. They would say things like, this is when it happened. This was this was the dark times, was this and this. And one thing that kept coming up that I was really surprised at, they would say, if it wasn't for insert name of video game that I was playing at the time, I don't know what I would have done. And that was kind of where that tipped off to me, because the video games, they were almost always single player. They were usually RPGs. And I kind of thought in my head, I was like, well, what is it about video games that these people, kind of saw as beneficial? There was now there's some kind of hard science. Now there's people, especially in terms of cognitive behavioral therapy, where in cognitive behavioral therapy, they've identified this thing, negative self-talk, right? That's where you just sit and you're really down on yourself and you really harsh. And they've identified something else called rumination. And negative rumination, it's, comes from the word that means to chew, and basically means to sit and stew in your thoughts and really let them kind of reach a boiling point. And for a person with depression, it cannot be understated how life or death that experience is. I mean, I know some of the things that we talk about are important, but they're not life or death.
Right.
Negative rumination for a depressive person is basically, it's possible if they have suicidal ideation. I'll tell you in a little bit why I've kind of, allowed to talk about this. If they have suicidal ideation, negative rumination is just them sitting with their brain that's trying to kill them. And they basically kind of have to talk, and they have to talk out of that situation. And so I want to be clear that I when I talk about video games as kind of a treatment, I'm not saying that it's going to cure your depression. I'm not saying it's going to it's a treatment in terms of it can keep you away from rumination. And then the question became kind of, okay, if video games were kind of a distraction for these people, why didn't they go to books, and why didn't they go to movies? And maybe there was something to the idea that video games, which are this thing that's really, I guess asking very little of you is kind of like a virtual getting stuff done kind of simulator, I guess. And that you know, you have to understand that when you have depression, you have two things kind of working against you when it comes to like accomplishing items on a to-do list. You have no motive force. You have nothing that's telling you to get out of bed and to go and to do that. And so that's why for depressed people, sometimes like them getting out of bed is this struggle that is the equivalent of maybe, you know, like Lance Armstrong biking for 70 miles. Like that's how much gumption they have to raise. That's how much that for a normal person that is mentally healthy, you kind of have that kind of motive force to go, you know, I have a purpose, I have a reason for being. And then the second thing is when you are done with that action, a normal person gets a little bonus feeling of a job well done. You know,
right.
I meant to take out the trash.
Exactly.
Rush. Exactly. And that's really, really important because it says like, hey, I meant to take that trash out today and I did, and I feel good about it for no other reason than I did it. And a depressed person doesn't have that. So you can imagine after doing that whole struggle, after accomplishing something that was so difficult for a normal person to do, they don't feel afterward like they have accomplished something. And so that's the kind of mind space that you're in. And then you play a video game, and for me it was Just Cause 2. It was about the year 2013, and I can remember sitting on the floor and playing Just Cause 2. Huge world. It required very little brain power to play that game. I was kind of like on autopilot, but I really immersed myself, and for just hours at a time, that was taking my mind off what was going on, I guess, in my head. And that was kind of like my, I guess, guiding me through what was happening. It's kind of important to me, I feel, that I'm able to articulate how a person with a mental illness is feeling, and it's important to me to explain that to a person that doesn't have that. And that's a really tall order, because it's almost like you're saying, I want to explain to people who have never ever considered killing themselves ever what it feels like to do that. I want them to achieve empathy with a person that they know, or a person that they know that knows someone, you know, that is either taking their own life or is in danger of that and stuff. And I know a lot of, you know, I know people right on Facebook. Okay. I know there's people out there that want to know more about these things, but the last conversation I had that was about mental health, I'll tell you about it. It was talking to this guy, and he was speaking really ignorantly about mania. And he was talking about how, you know, from what I've studied of mania, it really sounds like something good. It really sounds like something I would want. You get a bunch of stuff done, right? You know, you're running around basically accomplishing things. Mania sounds great. And I told him, I was like, you know, I was like, I'm going to address what you said, but before I do, I want you to know that I am actually manic depressive. I have bipolar disorder, is what I said. And, before I could go on to tell him, you know, what I was going to tell him was that mania was actually not at all a peaches and cream situation by any means. That really it's almost like you have a flood of things that you start, and you do step one of everything, and you never get to step two because there's another step one over here. And so you're super anxious about everything that's being undone, and you sleep like 2 hours a night, and when you try to go to sleep, it's like trying to close your eyes with somebody shining a flashlight just right in your face, and then your eyes like snap open 2 hours later. Your body's exhausted, but your brain is like, we're up and awake, it's time to do things. And I before I could tell him that mania was really a fate worse than death, a literal hellish nightmare state to be in, you know what he said? He goes, because remember, the last thing I said was, I am manic depressive, I have bipolar disorder. He goes, but do you really?
Yeah.
Or he goes, did a doctor tell you that you have that? Or did you just go online and read some stuff?
Oh, wow.
That's what he said. It was about going online. And you know what the craziest thing, my first thought was, you know, that's exactly what people say to me when I tell them that my wife has celiac disease. Like, they're always like, yeah, but does she really? Because I know about this, you know, carb diet, okay?
To be
fair, I know about some people.
To be fair, and I don't mean to defend this person that you're talking to, because he sounds like a winner. But, you know, the reason why people get like, oh, really? You really have celiac disease? It's because there are people out there that ruin it for the people that actually have the disease. There are people like that, you know, I'm gluten-free. It's like, no, you're fucking not. You're not gluten-free. What you are, I'll tell you what you are. Your doctor said that you're a little overweight and whatever, and maybe you should, be eat things without gluten. And then, because if you do eat things, that are gluten-free, there's no bread, you're not eating a whole bunch of sugar, so you're going to be a lot healthier. And so they take it to the next level, and they say, I have celiac disease. Like, no, that's not what your freaking doctor said. And so they use that to take advantage of other people, and it annoys people. It just annoys people.
Maybe I think we all have that aggression, and I think we all have that inside, and it takes it all comes erupting, and it's all bottled up until someone's like, yeah, no, she has celiac disease, and then but did a doctor say,
And so we see,
we all have that, and we take it out on but do you though? Are you gluten free?
It's like vegetarianism,
And I guess it was just so. That was what I thought of. That I was maybe there's enough misinformation out there. Maybe maybe that's the best kind of empathy that we can give that guy I was talking to. Maybe he has somebody in his life that played the bipolar card on him, but it wasn't a doctor. It was some stuff they read online. Whatever.
Right.
But I it's important to me, I think, to articulate exactly how that particular mental illness feels. Not so that people know that I'm a card-carrying, truly official, certified loony bin by a doctor. Not so they know that, but so that people will know, how I want people to know how common depression is, so that when you do have a thought in your head that says you're the only one that feels like this, that's what depression tells you,
right.
Which is ridiculous, but depression is by far the most common mental illness, and depression tells you this is it. Everyone else is happy. Everyone else has control of everything. You are the only one that feels like this. People will know that that's a lie immediately. I want that stigma. I want that taboo. I want that uncomfortableness to vanish completely from conversations about depression, because here's something that I've been bottling up that makes me just so mad is how we have this just cornucopia of human emotions that are just so I guess wonderful to commune with people in, you've had a good sadness, right? And it's not I'm not talking about depression here. I'm talking about maybe you break up with somebody and there's this weight in that there was so much in that relationship that now you hurt so much, and you're just in awe of how much you can feel, and you listen to sad songs, right? And those sad songs, you actually seek out ways to kind of make that last a little longer. And you talk to someone else that's sad, and you guys can commune together and be less sad, and you can share a moment. You can form an actual memory, a real moment with somebody. And that's, because I believe that if you go around your day and you're on autopilot all the time, you don't really make memories about that day. I think that the only things that you remember in your life relationship wise are stuff that was real, stuff that, maybe there was anger that you bottled up about someone, and that you and that person hashed it out, and you heard their side and they heard your side, and you were both better for it afterward, and you were tighter bond because of it and stuff. And so we have, like I said, we have this pantheon of beautiful emotions that we commune with people, but for some reason that just makes me so mad. The only socially acceptable thing that you could be with anyone ever is happy. That's it.
Yeah.
You can especially with you know how it is, I guess these days all friends are kind of arm's length friends, and there's no realness. I guess there's no real connection that you make, and so it's whoa. As soon as the exact same people that'll get on Facebook and say I'm here to listen if you ever want to talk about mental health, the same people are the ones that there's all of a sudden some weirdness because they didn't think it was going to be like that, or they didn't think it was going to look like that. And when you I'm the opposite, and so that it's so frustrating for me because I'm the opposite. My entire life, when I've been standing around and someone was like, "Hey," if someone was like, "Hey," and you always think they're, but what's about to come out of their mouth is pretty crazy. It was only 67 degrees yesterday, huh? Wow. Nothing. Foghorn, nothing. But instead, you expect them to say that, right?
Yeah.
But instead, they're like, "Hey, on the way here, I hit a kid on a bicycle. I just drove off. I didn't know what to do." Then I never ever run from a conversation like that. I'm always face first. I'm here it is. This is something real. Something happened today, and it was this. I have got to hear more about this. I've got to hear more about this. And I think I haven't met enough people that have that attitude. And I really wish that like, I really wish, I know that like getting out of bed effort is the same amount of effort that it takes to like finally say, you know what, I don't know what to do with these things that I've been thinking. I really need to like unload on somebody. I need to like kind of like softball a conversation topic with my friend here to see if like we're okay with that going, and then it gets squashed. And I don't know, like I would just hate a year later, right, when that person takes their own life, for that friend to be like, well, what could I have said? What could I have done? That's right. The kind of like, I guess, seriousness that I put on like a topic like this.
Yeah, absolutely. And to bring it back to the video game thing.
Oh yeah.
Not what you just said was not beautiful. I'm just saying. I actually, what you said about like when you're having a moment, or you're having those thoughts in your head, those negative feelings and those thoughts, and you a person dives into a video game that's, and they play it for hours and hours and hours. A lot of people would view that as an issue because, you're not in the real world trying to solve the problem. You're instead inside this fake world solving these little problems that really don't benefit you in the real world. But so I believe that there's some truth to that. However, I think you have to take into consideration, it's like I think what the game is doing to someone's brain, as far as hitting those certain receptors, that dopamine rush, that serotonin lift. And yes, it's coming from a place that is in fact fake, but the chemicals firing off in your brain is not. And you're competing, you're trying to reach a goal, which these things are necessary, as far as that I could see in treating a symptom of depression, if I'm not wrong. Because having a goal and completing the goal and being happy that you did complete that goal helps in alleviating, if I'm not wrong.
Well, another, I guess, criticism that people have against video games, in addition to that they cause violence, which I think was a thing we heard growing up a lot. Yeah. And now I think in our adult life, now that we have responsibilities and some more, like, I guess, real world problems, the criticism of video games is that it's pointless, right? That there's no, I guess, purpose, that your life isn't like enriched at all by them. And I know that doesn't mean anything to you, because you and me both like video games, and we know that they're very far from pointless, right?
Right.
But to a person with depression, I want you to see that like everything is kind of on that baseline. Everything is pointless, so I might as well have fun for 0.2 seconds, right? I might as well distract myself and carry myself to like the next, event that I have, because I can understand why it's strange to tell someone that like, hey, I can't be left alone with my brain, and if I just sit here and think, it's bad, because people are like, oh, well, sitting there and thinking is really the best thing that you can do, because you can think your way through.
Yeah, but what if you think wrong?
There's some problems you can't think your way through, and that's one of the scariest really parts of depression, is learning that your brain sends you messages that you cannot trust. Your brain actually lies to you while it's happening. And that's, you've been trusting your brain your entire life. As far as you can tell, that's who you are. That's what you is. It's just a skeleton with a brain inside. Like, what do you mean you can't trust your brain? What do you mean your brain is telling you things that aren't real? Well, it is. And I mean, and I think we're starting to learn in a good way how much of what we feel is determined by kind of is less than us just deciding to feel a way. Maybe you feel really hungry really angry, and then you realize, well, I haven't been drinking enough water today. Maybe you think like I know that when my wife and I are angry at each other, almost always the first thing that we do is we go and we eat something. Like, you go over here and I'm eating a granola bar, I'll go over here. And if we're still mad afterwards, then we'll talk about it. Then we'll
Right.
hash this thing out. But
There's
99
something to
times out
that.
of 100, 99 times out of 100, and so there's if all you are is like the last 3 meals you ate, and all you are is whether or not you got good sleep last night. I don't think it's too
Yeah.
much of a stretch to imagine that if this kind of like brain, if there was something wrong with it, it could lead you down a path that doesn't make sense to go down.
Right, and I'm sure you've read or heard about like they did some sort of study or test or something where a judge, if the judge was hungry or the judge didn't eat in the morning before he handed down the sentence, almost all the time it was like 80% he would give a guilty verdict. But then if he had eaten like breakfast or eaten prior to the verdict, it went from like 80% to like 30%. Because he was satiated.
Sounds like a Snickers commercial.
That'd be a very controversial commercial. But and I've had conversations with friends who have children, and I don't exactly know what to say because it's children, but they'll have children that they just play video games all the time, and it's starting to interfere with their homework and their school and something to that effect. And I don't exactly know what to say to them. And I do ask about like what they're, and usually it starts, they don't tell me everything as far as like what's going on in the family because, as far as me, like I love playing video games because I just love playing video games and I would play for hours when I was a kid, and nothing exactly like traumatic happened in my life where I'm just like, I need to play, video games to alleviate these symptoms of whatever, I'm going through. But
like some loser.
Yeah, like some loser. But, in one particular case, they had just gotten married. She's not, she wasn't the mother. She was, she had just come into this family and he was playing video games a lot. And, and I think that has something to do with it too. It's like, he's escaping this situation in a way, because the real world aspect of the family kind of separating, and now all these new elements are in the family. So the one thing that he can control is this video game, and he's trying to take control back.
Well, I mean, I'm sure both of us could think of like good things that could be abused, right? I mean, things that are inherently benign, right? We talked earlier about football and basketball and stuff, and that's like all fun and games, but people could have bench clearing brawls. So I don't like. I guess sometimes I guess it's almost kind of cheap that people dog on video games or that they use them as a scapegoat because they're like, there's a real fix to this problem, but I'm gonna blame video games
right
instead. I think there's something at the core. I guess maybe I get that more. I guess like now that I'm married, I feel like if Leah had a problem with video games, and I mean, it's cool that she doesn't, but then that's something that I would do less, I guess. Not for me, right? But I mean, I don't know.
Whoa.
There are real people in the world. I just dropped my keyboard. That's all that just fell.
It's a dope keyboard.
It's kind of off to the side. Oh, I know, right? It's pretty rad. You can probably see the reflection of my glasses. I've got 6 screens that I'm looking at. Well, 7 if you count the phone.
I think, I think we're coming up on the end. I think it was about hour and a half, hour 45. If there's anything else that you think that we were missing here as far as this topic, I think I just think I'm optimistic in the future as far as the utility of video games, and even though they will always be lambasted by politicians or bloggers or activists of sorts, I do believe that video games are hold a net benefit to people who play them and people who appreciate them. I think, you could say, yeah, there are bad things about video games. I'm sure there is some sort of negative effect that to some people a video game might have, but I think for most people, video games help any situation. I use video games as sort of a meditation. I wake up every morning, like it's so funny. Like my wife had a idea of me swapping lives with Kyle, and and you know how Kyle, he wakes up every morning. He's a CrossFit trainer. He wakes up every morning at 5, and he does he has his diet, and he's very health conscious and very responsible and all that stuff. And she had the idea of me swapping lives with him and follow each other with a camera. And I'm like, dude, he'd get the better end of that stick so hard. So what my thing is,
to do less.
He would get to do less, man. He would just he would like every morning at 6, let the dogs out, feed the dogs, sit down for a couple hours playing video games, go to work, come back, eat dinner, watch Netflix, and that's it. And then I guess my whole thing is like, I wouldn't want to do the CrossFit stuff. Meanwhile, if I swapped with him, I would wake up at 5 and go do CrossFit. He would wake up at 5 and play video games.
It does. Wow, Shane.
Yeah, I know. But anyway, I use it because I think it clears my head for the day. It really does clear my head for the rest of the day. So it's sort of like a meditation tool. It's like firing my brain in the necessary cylinders in order to wake up and get ready for the job that I got to go to.
I can see that. That's fair. And I'm sure everybody uses it for a different reason. I'm sure, and everybody kind of has I don't think I was put here to judge other people for living a different life as me, so I don't want to say like, well, they use video games in this way and it's not really what I do. But I can see, I guess, how I guess I spent all that time talking about how great video games were for people who were depressed, essentially because it distracted them from how depressed they were. And I can totally see how somebody was like, well, where's the benefit? But I think I've talked to enough people that did see the benefit, and it was almost like it only takes a millimeter's worth of work to push a button on a video game, but on the screen your guy he swings a big sword and he kills a big dragon, and I think that life in general, and not everybody feels this way, but I think that life in general asks a lot of you. I think that there's a very heavy life is kind of like a very heavy thing that sits on you, and you push back against it, and kind of every year you get weaker and it gets harder and stuff. But video games ask very little of you, and there's something that you can just like who am I to take that away from someone just because I think like maybe this aspect of it is pointless or that it doesn't accomplish something. I don't feel like I've been in a place where I could be depressed and I could go run a marathon and I still wouldn't feel like I accomplished something, right? Mm-hmm. So maybe that's not completely the goal, and that's why I'm glad that people are kind of looking into CBT and seeing that there's like we need to kind of get in kind of inside people's heads and hear what they're saying to themselves, hear what they're telling themselves that they believe is true.
Yep, I couldn't agree more. And I think that is the end of this episode 1 of XPlicit Materia God Mode. I appreciate everyone listening and everyone watching. And I think, dude, this is great. I want to do this again. We're gonna do it again. I don't know when, because I don't have a schedule. I never schedule anything because that's just who I am, and I apologize for that. But that's just what you get. That's what you get with me, y'all. And I hope you enjoy.
We'll figure it out.
Yeah, we'll figure it out. But I hope you enjoy. Thank you, Evan, as always, for
Thanks for having me, Shane.
Exquisite commentary. Exquisite.
I do what I can.
Yeah. All right. That's it. See y'all next time.